Welcome to Soft Sleep Tales, a place where timeless stories, gentle narration, and quiet atmospheres guide you toward rest. Before tonight's story begins, you are warmly invited to share where you are listening from in the comments below. It is always a comfort to see this quiet community reaching across the world night by night. And if these stories bring you a sense of calm, you are welcome to subscribe and join us on these peaceful journeys. Now, take a moment to get comfortable. Settle into your bed or your favorite chair. Gently close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and allow the day to soften and fade. Let my voice carry you quietly into sleep, to a place where imagination drifts and rest comes naturally. The commission had come by post, a single page, handwritten, on paper, the color of old cream. The handwriting formal and unhurried, the handwriting of someone who had been taught that a letter was a considered thing, not a convenience. Nora Vane had read it twice at her kitchen table in Clerkenwell, with the morning coming grey through the window and her tea going cold beside her, and then she had read it a third time. The letter was from a Mr. Aubrey Cassell, solicitor, acting on behalf of the Ashmore estate, Ashmore Hall, near the village of Comford, in the south of Devon. A gallery of sculptural works accumulated over 3 generations of the Ashmore family, requiring assessment, documentation, and restoration where necessary. The collection had been closed for some years. The hall itself was currently unoccupied. Mr. Cassell had been given her name by Professor Whitmore of the London Institute, who had described her as thorough and discreet. Both qualities, the letter noted, would be required. Nora had set the letter down. She had looked out at the grey Clerkenwell morning, at the rooftops and the chimneys and the particular quality of London light in October, which was not a quality so much as an absence of quality, a flatness, a pressing down of the sky onto everything beneath it. Then she had picked up the letter again and written her reply. The train to Devon left Paddington at 9. Nora sat with her work bag on the seat beside her and her notebook open in her lap and watched England change outside the window. London thinning and dissolving, the way it always did when you left it, not gradually but in stages, each stage a different quality of light and air, until suddenly there were fields and the sky was larger and the colours were different, and you could not have said exactly when the city had ended and the country had begun. She had been to Devon once before, years ago, as a child, with her parents, a summer holiday, a cottage near the sea. She remembered the light more than anything. The particular quality of Devon light that was softer than London light, more diffused, as though the county had arranged its weather specifically to make everything within it look like a watercolour. She did not know what to expect from Ashmore Hall. She had done her research a small amount, what was available in the public record. The Ashmore family had been Devon gentry for 2 centuries. The hall had been built in the 1750s and extended twice since. The sculptural collection had been begun by the second Ashmore, a man of considerable wealth and considerable taste, who had spent 20 years acquiring works in Italy and Greece and bringing them home. His son had continued. His grandson, the last of the line, had not. The collection had been closed when the last Ashmore died 11 years ago, without heirs. The estate had passed to a trust. The trust had engaged Mr. Cassell. Mr. Cassell had written to Professor Whitmore. Professor Whitmore had given her name. And now she was on a train to Devon with her work bag and her notebook, and the particular feeling she always had at the beginning of a new commission, a feeling that was not quite excitement and not quite apprehension, but something between the two. the feeling of approaching something unknown with the intention of understanding it. She wrote in her notebook, Ashmore Hall, Devon, October, sculptural collection, 3 generations, closed 11 years. Assess, document, restore. She paused, then wrote one more line, thorough and discreet. Mr. Castle met her at the station. He was a small man of about 60, precise and neat in his dress, with the particular manner of a solicitor who has spent 40 years managing other people's affairs and has developed, in the process, a professional warmth that was genuine but carefully measured. He shook her hand. He inquired about her journey. He expressed satisfaction that she had come promptly. The drive to Ashmore Hall took 20 minutes. They went in Mr. Castle's trap along lanes that became progressively narrower and more serious hedgerows pressing in. The canopy of October-thinned trees meeting overhead. The occasional view of a valley or a hillside glimpsed between gaps in the green before being closed off again. Devon in October had exactly the quality she remembered, the light soft and diffused, the colours very particular, the deep red of the turning hedgerow leaves, the particular grey-green of the Devon fields, the sky a pale blue that was almost white at the edges. Mr. Castle said very little during the drive. She did not mind. She was looking at the landscape and thinking about sculptures and what 11 years of closure did to stone and bronze and the various materials that sculptors had used over 2 centuries of collecting. Then the lane turned, and Ashmore Hall appeared. It was larger than she had imagined. Not imposingly large, not the kind of house that announces itself, more the kind that reveals itself gradually, as the lane approached it through its own grounds, so that you saw it first as a glimpse through trees, then as a roofline, then as a full facade, each revelation adding to what came before without quite preparing you for the whole. Stone, the local Devon stone, a warm grey that turned almost gold in certain lights. 3 stories, many windows. A portico over the front door with 4 columns, not grand exactly, but considered the addition of someone who had thought carefully about proportion. Ivy along the east wing, gone now to its autumn red. The grounds around the house large and somewhat overgrown, not neglected, simply long, the grass deep, the paths visible but faint, their edges blurred by years of modest encroachment. The house was empty. She could feel this even from the lane. Not abandoned, maintained, clearly. The windows clean, the roof sound, but empty in the way that houses are empty when the person who made them what they were is no longer in them. A preserved emptiness, a held breath. Mr. Castle pulled up on the gravel before the door. He produced a large key ring. He selected a key with the confidence of someone who has done this before and guided her to the front door and turned the lock. The door opened smoothly and without drama onto a wide entrance hall, stone-floored, with a staircase curving upward and portraits on the walls looking out with the particular patience of people who have been waiting a long time and have made their peace with it. The air inside smelled of old stone and linseed oil and something else. Something cool and dry and faintly mineral. Marble, she thought, or limestone. The particular smell of worked stone in a closed room. The gallery. Mr. Castle showed her the house efficiently. The room she would sleep in, a good bedroom on the 2nd floor, simply furnished. A window looking out over the south garden. A kitchen that had been stocked for her arrival: bread, cheese, preserves, a covered pot of something on the range. A sitting room with a fireplace that had been laid. a study with a desk where she could work in the evenings. He showed her all of this with the manner of a man completing a task he had set himself. Then he led her to the east wing. The gallery occupied the entire ground floor of the east wing, a long room perhaps 80 feet, she estimated, with a ceiling higher than the rest of the house. The windows along the south wall were tall and narrow, designed to admit light without admitting direct sun. The floor was pale stone, worn smooth in the center where generations of feet had walked the length of it. And on plinths, along both walls and down the center of the room, the sculptures. Nora stood in the doorway and looked. There were more of them than she had expected. Not in number, she had been told the collection was substantial, but in presence. Each one had a presence that was its own, separate from the others, separate from the room. Figures in marble and bronze, and one or two in limestone. Classical subjects, mostly the postures and proportions of a collection assembled by someone who had spent time in Italy and understood what they were looking at. Gods and goddesses and allegorical figures, and one or two portraits, the subjects unnamed. She walked slowly into the room. Mr. Castle remained at the doorway. She walked the length of the gallery, looking at each piece in turn, not assessing yet, simply looking, taking in the whole before beginning on the parts. The particular quality of each figure in the long afternoon light from the south windows, the shadows they cast on the pale stone floor, the way certain pieces seemed to absorb the light and others seemed to give it back. She reached the far end of the gallery. She turned and walked back. She was almost at the door when she noticed it. Near the end of the north wall, between two marble figures, a draped woman and a young man with his arm raised, a plinth, empty. She stopped. She looked at it. The plinth was the same as the others, pale stone, square, slightly elevated, in good condition, but empty, the surface of it showing, very faintly, the circular mark of something that had stood on it for a long time and had been removed, the stone slightly less weathered in that circle than around it, the mark of an absence. She looked at Mr. Castle. He was looking at the plinth too, his expression careful and neutral, the expression of someone who has noticed this before and has decided not to be the one to raise it. "How many pieces are in the collection?" Nora asked. "The inventory lists 18, Mr. Castle said. Nora looked at the plinths, counted. 17. She looked at the empty plinth again, at the faint circular mark, at the space where something had stood for how long she could not yet say, but long enough to leave its mark, long enough for the stone beneath to tell the story of its presence. "Do you know what stood here?" she asked. "No," said Mr. Castle. "I was hoping you might find out." She ate supper in the kitchen that evening. The pot on the range had been a good vegetable soup, thick and well seasoned. The kind of soup that suggested whoever had made it understood what a person arriving at an empty house in October would need. She ate it with the bread and a small amount of the preserves, and sat afterward with her tea and her notebook and the particular quietness of a large house in the evening. Outside, the October dark had come in early. The kitchen window showed nothing but her own reflection and the faint shapes of the south garden beyond the overgrown grass, the dark mass of a yew tree in the corner, the wall. She opened her notebook. She wrote what she had seen: the gallery, the 17 sculptures, the empty plinth, the circular mark, the inventory, listing 18. She wrote, "One piece unaccounted for, no record of removal, no record of sale, plinth in situ, undamaged, mark suggesting long occupation, decades, possibly longer." She paused. then wrote, "Where is the 18th?" She closed the notebook. She sat with her tea and listened to the house. It was very quiet, the particular quiet of a house in the Devon countryside at night, not silent, because nothing was silent, but deeply still. The occasional sound of the house itself, the tick of a pipe, the small shift of old timber, the wind outside, very light tonight, moving through the yew tree with a low, unhurried sound. She thought about the empty plinth, about the 18 in the inventory and the 17 in the room, about the circular mark in the stone that told the story of something that had stood there patiently for a long time and then had not. She thought, tomorrow I will look at the inventory properly. I will look at the archivist's records. I will find what was there. She thought, there is always a record. Everything leaves a mark. She banked the range. She took her lamp and went upstairs. Her bedroom was warm from the small fire that had been laid and lit another small kindness, another evidence of someone having thought about what she would need. She changed and sat for a while in the chair by the window with the lamp low. Outside, the Devon night was very dark and very still, the south garden just visible, the yew tree, the wall, and beyond the wall the fields going away to where the hills were, invisible in the dark. She thought about the gallery below her, about the 17 figures standing in the dark in the long room, about the empty plinth between the draped woman and the young man with his arm raised, about the space where something had been, and was not, and might, with patience and attention and the willingness to look carefully at what things left behind when they departed, be found. She went to bed. She lay in the old bedroom of the old house and listened to the Devon night, to the wind in the yew tree, to the house settling, to the particular silence of a collection of stone figures standing in a long room in the dark, patient as all things made of stone are patient. She was asleep before the lamp had fully burned down, deeply and quietly asleep, in the house that had been waiting for someone thorough and discreet. She was in the gallery before breakfast. The morning had come in grey and soft, the Devon light doing what Devon light did, diffusing itself through a thin layer of cloud until it was everywhere and nowhere, arriving in the gallery through the tall south windows without casting shadows, making everything in the room equally visible and equally mysterious. Nora stood before the empty plinth. In the morning light it was more visible than it had been the evening before. The circular mark in the stone very clear, a slightly darker ring, perhaps 18 inches in diameter, where the base of something had sat for long enough to leave its impression. Not a stain, not damage, simply the record of presence. The stone within the ring marginally less dusty, marginally less weathered than the stone around it. She crouched down and looked more closely. At the very edge of the ring, barely visible, the faintest trace of something. She leaned closer. A mark in the stone, not the mark of the base, but something else. A small, incised line, then another. Then, as her eye adjusted to the scale of it, the suggestion of letters, very small, cut into the plinth surface with considerable delicacy, at the inner edge of where the base had rested. She took her magnifying glass from her work bag. She brought it close. The letters resolved themselves slowly, small and precise, and carved with the same care as everything else in this gallery. Nothing here had been done without thought. She read, "For R who understood." She sat back on her heels. For R who understood. A dedication cut into the base of the plinth at the point where the sculpture would have concealed it, visible only if the sculpture were removed, or if someone looked very closely at the edge of the ring the sculpture had left behind. A private thing. not meant for display, meant for whoever placed the sculpture there, and for whoever R was, and for no one else. She wrote it in her notebook. Then she straightened and looked at the two sculptures on either side of the empty plinth. The draped woman on the left, the young man with his raised arm on the right. She looked at them more carefully than she had the evening before. The draped woman was marble, classical in pose, standing, one hand at her side, the other raised slightly, as though offering something. Her face smooth and composed, the particular composure of classical sculpture that was not coldness but restraint. The carving excellent, a good piece, not the finest in the collection but very good. She looked at the base, a small plaque, the title engraved on it in the manner of the period, Patience. She looked at the young man on the right, bronze this time, slightly smaller, a figure caught in motion, the raised arm, the turned head, the posture of someone who has just heard something and is about to respond. His expression alert and open, also very good. His base plaque, expectation. Nora looked at the empty space between them, patience on one side, expectation on the other, and between them, something that had been removed. Something that had stood between patience and expectation for long enough to leave a circle of darker stone and a private dedication cut into the plinth beneath. She thought about what might stand between patience and expectation. She wrote in her notebook, patience, expectation, empty, dedication, for R. Who understood? Find the inventory. Find the 18th. The archive was in the study. Mr. Castle had mentioned it the day before, a mahogany cabinet against the far wall, locked. He had left her the key. She unlocked it that morning after breakfast and found inside a collection of folders and ledgers, neatly organized and labeled, spanning the full history of the Ashmore collection. She took everything to the desk and began. She worked the way she always worked, methodically, from the beginning, not skipping ahead to the answer she was looking for. The archive rewarded this kind of attention. It was a good archive. Whoever had maintained it over the generations had done so with the same care that had been given to the collection itself. Each acquisition recorded with its date and provenance and purchase price and the notes of the person who had acquired it. Each loan recorded, each restoration, each movement within the gallery. The second Ashmore, Richard Ashmore, the original collector, had begun the records in 1781. His handwriting was distinctive, clear and energetic, with the particular confidence of someone who knows what they are doing and considers it worth recording. He had acquired pieces over 20 years of travel: Rome, Florence, Athens, once as far as Constantinople. Each acquisition recorded with a detail and enthusiasm that made the archive feel less like a ledger and more like a correspondence, as though he were writing to someone about what he had found. She read through the acquisitions slowly. Most she could match immediately to pieces in the gallery. The Patience acquired Florence, 1784. The Expectation acquired Rome, 1787. The draped figures, the portrait busts, the classical allegories, each one appearing in the record and then in the gallery, accounted for. She reached the end of the second Ashmore's records. She had matched 17 pieces. She went back through more carefully, page by page, looking for the 18th, for anything she might have missed, for an acquisition recorded but not placed, or placed but not described. She found it on the last page of the second Ashmore's records. Not an acquisition, a commission. The entry was dated 1793. The handwriting slightly different from the earlier entries, slower, more careful, as though the writer had paused between words. as though the writing had cost something. She read, "Commissioned from Mr. Thomas Aldrich, sculptor, of Bath, a figure in marble. The subject to be determined by Mr. Aldrich according to his own understanding of the matter. The commission given freely and without specification, in the belief that Mr. Aldrich will know what is required better than I can say. To be placed in the gallery between patience and expectation, where it belongs. Payment agreed. Work to begin in the spring." Nora read it twice. Then she looked for the next entry. The delivery of the piece, the record of its installation, the title on its base plaque. There was no next entry. The second Ashmore's records ended there, on the commission, on the belief that Mr. Aldrich would know what was required, on the instruction to place it between patience and expectation where it belongs. The following pages were in a different hand, the third Ashmore, taking up the record where his father had left it, and the third Ashmore made no mention of the commission, no record of delivery, no record of installation, no title, no description, as though the commission had never been completed, or as though it had been completed and then deliberately not recorded. Nora sat back in the study chair and looked at the archive spread across the desk. A figure commissioned and not recorded. A plinth, empty. A dedication cut into stone where no one would see it unless they were looking very carefully. For who understood? She thought about Richard Ashmore, the second Ashmore, the collector who had written his acquisitions like letters to someone, full of detail and enthusiasm, who had commissioned a sculpture without specification because he believed the sculptor would know what was required, who had written his last entry in slower, more careful handwriting, as though the writing had cost something. She thought, Richard. She looked out the study window at the overgrown south garden, at the yew tree, at the grey October sky above the Devon fields. She thought, the dedication was for him. He commissioned the piece and he dedicated the plinth to himself or to whatever he understood the piece to be for him. And then he died. And the third Ashmore received the sculpture or did not receive it, and either way did not record it. And the gallery remained with its empty plinth between patience and expectation for how long? For ever since. She took a fresh page in her notebook. She wrote, "Find Thomas Aldrich. Find the commission. Find what he made." She spent the afternoon in the gallery. Not looking for the 18th anymore, she had enough to pursue that elsewhere. Simply working, beginning the assessment she had been commissioned to do. Moving methodically through the pieces, examining each one closely, making her notes, condition of the stone or bronze, evidence of previous restoration, damage present or potential, recommendations. It was quiet work, the kind she loved. The gallery was very still in the afternoon, the light from the south windows moving slowly across the floor as the hours advanced, the shadows of the sculptures lengthening and shifting. She moved from piece to piece with her notebook and her magnifying glass and her small kit of assessment tools, and the house was quiet around her, and the Devon afternoon did its slow October work outside the windows. She paused before each figure for a long time, not just assessing, looking, really looking, the way her training had taught her, the way that required patience and time, and the willingness to set aside what you expected to see in order to see what was actually there. Each piece had been made by someone who had looked at the world and found in it something worth making permanent. That was what sculpture was, she had always thought. Not the imitation of the world, but the selection of it. The choosing of one thing, one figure, one moment, one gesture, and saying, this is worth keeping. This is worth the effort of stone. She paused before the patience, looked at it for a long time. The raised hand, the composed face, the particular quality of stillness in the figure that was not the stillness of inaction but the stillness of someone who has decided that waiting is itself a form of work. Then she turned and looked at the empty plinth, patience on one side, the empty space in the middle, expectation on the other. She thought about what belonged between them, what the second Ashmore had believed Thomas Aldrich would know, what Thomas Aldrich had made, if he had made it. What stood between patience and expectation, and was worth commissioning without specification, and worth dedicating a plinth to with a private inscription that no one would see. She did not have an answer. She had a question, and the question felt, standing in the gallery in the afternoon light, with the shadows of the sculptures on the pale floor, worth pursuing. That evening she found the letters. She had gone back to the archive after supper, drawn by the feeling, familiar from other commissions, that there was more in a good archive than one pass revealed. She went through the cabinet more carefully this time. Behind the main folders of acquisition records, at the very back of the lower shelf, a smaller bundle, tied with a piece of faded ribbon, dark red, the same dark red as the cabinet's lining. Letters. She untied the ribbon carefully. There were 9 of them, the paper old and slightly brittle at the edges, the handwriting on the outside of each one the same as the archive entries Richard Ashmore's hand. But these were not letters sent. These were letters received. The handwriting inside different, smaller, more compressed, the hand of someone who wrote quickly and with great concentration. The signature at the bottom of the first letter, T. Aldrich. Nora sat very still at the desk for a moment. Then she settled back in the chair, the first letter in her hands, and began to read. The letter was dated March 1793. Shortly after the commission entry in the archive, Thomas Aldrich writing to Richard Ashmore about the commission, about what he understood it to be, about what he intended to make. His writing was direct and unadorned, not the writing of a man who used more words than were necessary, but precise, every word chosen. He wrote, "I have been thinking about what you asked of me. You said to make what I thought was required. I have thought about this for some weeks now, and I believe I understand what you mean, though I am not certain you could have said it directly any more than I can. There are some things that resist naming. I will try anyway, in the making of it, to give the nameless thing a shape. I think that is what sculpture is for." Nora read the letter twice. Then she read the second, and the third, moving through the 9 letters slowly, following the correspondence between the collector and the sculptor across the months of 1793. Richard Ashmore's side of the correspondence was not present only Aldrich's responses, but, from the responses, she could piece together the shape of the exchange, the questions Ashmore had asked, the hesitations, the moments when the commission seemed almost to falter, when Ashmore seemed to doubt whether the thing he wanted could be made, whether any material was equal to it. And Aldrich's responses, patient, certain, the responses of someone who had understood from the beginning what was being asked, and had not doubted for a moment that it could be done. The 6th letter, written in late summer, 1793. You ask if I am certain. I am. I have been working on the figure for 4 months now, and I can tell you that it is coming. Not quickly, some things resist being hurried, and this is one of them, but it is coming. I think you will recognize it when you see it. Not because it will be what you expected, I do not think you know what you expected, but because it will be true, and true things, when you see them, feel familiar. even if you have never seen them before. Nora set the letter down. She looked at the fire, which had burned low in the study grate while she had been reading. She looked at the window, which showed the Devon night dark and still and deeply quiet. She thought about true things feeling familiar. She thought about the empty plinth, about patience and expectation on either side, about what stood between them that was neither patience nor expectation, but something that required both, that came from both, that was the reason for both. She picked up the seventh letter and read. She went to bed late, later than she had intended. The letters had kept her, each one drawing her further into the correspondence between two men who had understood each other across the particular distance of their different kinds of work. Richard Ashmore, who collected, and Thomas Aldrich, who made. The collector, who knew what he wanted but could not say it, and the sculptor, who could not say it either but believed he could make it. She had read all 9 letters. The 9th was dated October 1793, the last. It was short, shorter than the others. It is finished. I will bring it myself in November, if you will permit. I do not wish to trust it to others. I think you will know where it goes. Between the two you showed me, in the place you described, I believe it belongs there. I believe it has always belonged there, and the gallery has simply been waiting for it to arrive. Nora folded the last letter carefully and placed it back in the bundle with the others and retied the dark red ribbon. She carried the letters upstairs with her. She set them on the bedside table. She changed and got into bed and lay in the dark Devon night with the letters beside her and the gallery below and the empty plinth between patience and expectation. She thought, it was brought. In November, Thomas Aldrich brought it himself. It was placed. It stood there, between patience and expectation, where it belonged. And then at some point, for some reason, it was removed and not recorded. And the plinth left empty, and the dedication left cut into the stone where no one would see it unless they were looking very carefully. She thought, why was it removed? She thought, where is it now? The house was very quiet around her, the Devon night pressing gently at the window, the yew tree in the garden making its small sound in the slight wind. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would look for Thomas Aldrich, in the local records, in the Bath archives, in whatever trail a sculptor left behind, and she would find the 18th figure. She was certain of this, not with the certainty of having found it, with the certainty of someone who has been given enough threads that the finding is only a matter of time and patience and the willingness to follow. True things, Thomas Aldrich had written, feel familiar when you see them, even if you have never seen them before. She thought she understood what he meant. She thought she had always understood it. She was asleep before she finished the thought. The gallery below in the dark, the 17 figures on their plinths, the one plinth empty, patient as stone, as it had always been. She found Thomas Aldrich in the village. Not the man himself, he had been dead for 100 years. But his presence, the way certain people leave their presence in places long after they are gone, not in any supernatural sense, but in the ordinary sense of having been there and having mattered, and having left behind the traces that matter leaves. She had walked to the village of Comford on the second morning, a 20-minute walk along the lane, through the thinning October hedgerows, past the fields and the stone walls, and the particular Devon quiet of a weekday morning in autumn. The village was small, a church, a post office, a public house, a public house, a public, a public, a pub, a pub, a pub. A handful of houses in the local stone, each one looking as though it had grown from the ground rather than been built upon it. The church was old. She had gone in without particular expectation, simply because old churches in old villages near old houses sometimes contained things that were useful to know. The particular kind of usefulness that came from generations of record-keeping births and deaths and marriages, and the small notations of local history that found their way onto stone and brass and the pages of parish registers. She found Thomas Aldrich on the north wall, a small marble tablet, not elaborate the tablet of a man who had not wanted elaboration, or whose friends had understood that he would not, his name, his dates, 1751 to 1826, and beneath, in the same small precise lettering of his own letters, a single line. He made things that were true. Nora stood before the tablet for a long time. He made things that were true, the words of his own letters, almost. True things feel familiar when you see them. And here, on his memorial, the same thought from the other direction. Not the viewer's recognition, but the maker's intention. He made things that were true, as a life's work, as an epitaph, as the only thing worth saying. She copied the inscription into her notebook. Then she looked at the dates. Born 1751, died 1826. The commission had been in 1793. He had been 42. He had lived another 33 years after completing the figure for Ashmore Hall, and he had died in Comfort, not in Bath, where he had been working when he wrote the letters. Here, in the village, at the end of the lane from Ashmore Hall. She walked back to the hall with this thought accompanying her. Thomas Aldrich had finished the commission and brought it himself in November of 1793, as he had said he would, and at some point after that he had moved to Comfort, to the village, a 20-minute walk from the house that contained his work, and had lived there for 33 years, and had died there, and had been buried there, and had been given a memorial tablet that described him in the language of his own letters. She thought, he stayed. She thought, why did he stay? The bodroom was reached by a door at the back of the kitchen. She had noticed it on her first evening, a low door, stone-framed, with an iron latch, and the particular look of a door that was used occasionally and without ceremony. She had not opened it then. Now, on the third morning, with the Thomas Aldrich question still in her mind, and the 9 letters on her bedside table, and the empty plinth waiting in the gallery, she opened it. Stone steps going down, cold air coming up, the particular cold of underground spaces, dry and still and slightly mineral. She took her lamp and went down. The basement was large, the full footprint of the house, divided into several rooms by stone walls. Storage, mostly. The accumulated material of generations, furniture under dust sheets, trunks, wooden crates, the various objects that houses collect over 2 centuries and cannot quite bring themselves to discard. She moved through carefully, not searching exactly, more the way she moved through archives with open attention, without a fixed idea of what she was looking for, trusting that what was there would present itself to someone patient enough to look. The first 2 rooms yielded nothing relevant. Furniture, china wrapped in cloth, books in crates, damp damaged, beyond saving. The ordinary accumulation of a large house over a long time. The third room was smaller. The door slightly harder to open. The stone floor had shifted slightly, catching the bottom of the door. She pushed through. It was different from the other rooms. Not storage, or not only storage. There was a work table against one wall, old, heavy, the surface marked in ways that suggested it had been used for something specific. Marks in the wood that she recognized. The particular stains of marble dust, the indentations of tools, the marks of someone who had worked at this table with stone. She looked around the room more carefully. On the far wall, a wooden cabinet, not dust-sheeted, simply standing, as though it had been left ready for use and no one had come back to use it. She opened it. Inside, rolled drawings, tied with string, a dozen of them, perhaps more. The paper, old but dry, the basement, had kept its temperature well, and this room especially. She lifted the first roll carefully, untied the string, unrolled it on the work table, holding the edges down with her hands. A drawing in pencil, detailed and precise, the drawing of someone who drew as a way of thinking, not as a way of decorating. A figure study. The figure standing, slightly turned, the weight shifted to one side in the manner of classical contrapposto. The face, not fully resolved, roughed in, the features suggested rather than defined, as though the drawer had not yet decided on the particulars, but the posture very clear. The gesture of the hands very specific, one at the side, one slightly raised, the fingers open. In the corner of the drawing, in the small compressed handwriting she recognized from the letters, T.A. October 1793. Nora stood at the work table with the drawing spread before her and felt something move through her quietly. Not excitement exactly, recognition, the feeling Thomas Aldrich had written about of seeing something true and finding it familiar. This was the preparatory drawing for the 18th figure. Thomas Aldrich had worked here, in this room, in the basement of Ashmore Hall. He had not simply delivered the piece, he had come here to finish it, or to refine it, or to be near the space where it would stand. He had used this table. He had made these drawings. She unrolled the second drawing, then the third. Each one a development of the figure, the posture becoming more certain with each iteration, the hands more specific, the face beginning to resolve, still not fully drawn, still suggested, but with increasing particularity. The quality of the face emerging slowly, the way faces emerge when a sculptor is working towards something he understands but has not yet fully made visible. She unrolled them all, laid them out across the work table and the floor, in order as best she could determine. 12 drawings, the figure developing through all 12, from the first rough study to the last, which was very nearly final, the posture settled, the hands exactly right, and the face, in the 12th drawing, for the first time, fully drawn. She looked at the face. It was the face of someone in the act of understanding something. Not the before, not the confusion or the questioning, and not the after, not the settled certainty of someone who has understood for a long time. The precise moment of understanding itself. The instant when something unclear becomes clear. When something you have been reaching for arrives. It was a very specific moment to choose, and a very difficult one to make in stone. She stood for a long time, looking at the 12 drawings spread across the work table and the floor, at the figure developing from its first rough iteration to this final face. At the face that captured a moment she knew that everyone knew, but that she had never seen rendered in any material before. She thought about what stood between patience and expectation. She thought she was beginning to understand. She ate lunch at the work table in the basement. She had meant to go up for lunch, as she had the day before, but she had not wanted to leave the drawings. She had gone upstairs only long enough to fetch bread and cheese and her flask of tea, and had come back down and sat at the work table, and Eton looking at the 12 studies of the figure that Thomas Aldrich had made in this room in October of 1793. The basement was quiet, more quiet than the rest of the house, which was itself very quiet. The particular quiet of underground spaces, sound absorbed rather than reflected, the world above muffled to a whisper. She could hear nothing from outside. No wind, no birds, no distant sounds of the village or the lane, only the quiet itself, and her own breathing, and the very faint sound of her pen on paper as she worked. She was copying the drawings into her notebook, not reproducing them exactly. She was not an artist in that sense, but making detailed written descriptions of each one, noting the developments from one to the next, recording what changed and what remained constant, building her own record of the figure as it had developed through Aldrich's thinking. The figure was female. She had not noted this explicitly before, but it was clear in the later drawings. The proportions, the posture, the particular way the hands were held. A woman, standing, neither young nor old, somewhere in the middle of things, the age at which a person has learned enough to understand, but has not yet forgotten what it felt like not to. The gesture of the hands, she kept returning to the hands. In the final drawing, they were the most precisely realized element of the figure, more resolved than the posture, more certain than the face. The right hand at the side, completely still. The fingers neither clenched nor spread, but resting. The left hand slightly raised, the palm turned upward in a gesture that was not offering and not supplication, and not quite either of the things those gestures usually meant. Something more particular. Something that suggested the moment of receiving something you had been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. Nora looked at her own left hand, turned it upward, let it rest that way. Yes, she wrote in her notebook. Figure, female, mid-age, standing, contrapposto, hands, right at rest, left raised, palm upward, gesture of receiving or recognition. Face, moment of understanding, between patience and expectation. This. She underlined the last word. This. In the afternoon she found the final drawing. Not in the cabinet. She had taken everything from the cabinet. This one had been behind the cabinet, fallen or placed between the back of the cabinet and the wall, invisible unless you moved the cabinet aside, which she did when she went to return the drawings to their rolls, because she wanted to check the wall behind for any other marks or records. The drawing had slipped partly behind the cabinet and lain there for she could not say how long. Years, certainly. The paper, slightly more yellowed than the others, slightly more fragile at the edges. She lifted it very carefully, carried it to the table, unrolled it under the lamp. It was not a figure study. It was a letter, written on the same drawing paper, in the same small compressed hand, in the same pencil as the studies, undated, unsent. It had never been folded for posting, never been addressed. A letter written and then left here, behind the cabinet, in the room where the work had been done. She read it. I have been trying to write this properly for 3 days, and I find I cannot. So I will write it as I would write a working note, plainly and without ornament, because that is the only way I know to be accurate about difficult things. The figure is finished. It is the best thing I have made. I do not say this with pride. Exactly, pride would suggest I believe I produced it entirely myself, which I do not. I think the figure was always there in the stone, and I only removed what was in the way. This is what sculptors say, and it is also, occasionally, true. This was one of those occasions. I have been in this house for 6 weeks. I came to finish the work, and I have finished it, and I should leave. I know I should leave. The work is done. Mr. Ashmore has been kind and patient, and has asked nothing of me except the work. But I find I do not wish to leave, not because of the house is fine, but it is not the house. Not because of the gallery is excellent, but it is not the gallery. Because of the figure, because of what it cost to make, and what it gave back. Because of what I understood in the making of it that I had not understood before, and that I do not wish to be very far from, now that I have understood it. I am going to ask if there is a cottage in the village. I think there probably is. I think I will stay for a while. I do not know what else to say. I have made a thing that is true, and I want to stay near it. That is all. T.A. Nora set the letter down very carefully. She sat at the work table in the basement of Ashmore Hall and looked at Thomas Aldrich's unsent letter and felt the particular feeling that came sometimes in this work, the feeling of having found something that had been waiting a very long time to be found. Not hidden exactly, simply mislaid, left in the space between a cabinet and a wall by someone who had not needed to keep it because he had already kept the thing it was about, who had stayed in the village for 33 years and had died there and had been buried there, who had made a thing that was true and had wanted to stay near it. She thought about the empty plinth. She thought, the figure exists, it was made, it was placed, it stood there. And then at some point, for some reason, it was moved. She was certain now that it had not been destroyed. You did not move a thing and leave the plinth and leave the dedication and leave the letters and leave the drawings. You moved it because you needed to move it. Because the house was closing. Because the last Ashmore had died and the estate had passed to a trust and someone had moved the figure for safekeeping. Or because someone had understood what it was and had wanted to keep it close. She needed to find the last Ashmore's records, the final years of the house, what had been moved and where. She took the unsent letter upstairs with her when she went. She set it with the 9 posted letters on the bedside table. She stood for a moment, looking at all 10 of them, the correspondence of a commission. The record of someone who had understood what was required, who had made a thing that was true, who had stayed near it for the rest of his life. She went to the archive. The last Ashmore's records were in the final folder in the cabinet. A thin folder. The last Ashmore, James Ashmore, the 3rd generation, had not been a keeper of records in the way of his grandfather. Where Richard Ashmore had written with enthusiasm and detail, James Ashmore had written briefly and with the manner of someone discharging an obligation. Acquisitions noted without description, loans recorded without comment, the collection maintained but not loved. She went through it quickly. Near the end of the folder, the final years of James Ashmore's occupation of the hall, before his death 11 years ago, a single entry. Brief, as all his entries were brief, but present. She read it. 18th piece removed from gallery, placed in the garden room for the winter. Note to self, return in spring. The entry was dated November, 11 years ago, the November before he died. He had not returned it in spring. He had died in January. And the garden room, she had not yet been in the garden room. She had not known there was a garden room. She went through the rest of the folder quickly, found a plan of the house, folded at the back a simple diagram, hand-drawn, each room labelled. The garden room was at the end of the east wing, beyond the gallery, a door she had passed without opening, thinking it another storage room. She put down the folder. She picked up her lamp. She went to the east wing. The gallery was dark at this hour. She walked through it with her lamp, the light moving across the faces of the 17 figures as she passed, the patience, the expectation, the empty plinth between them. She paused at the plinth for a moment, looked at the circular mark, at the dedication cut into the stone. For Ah, who understood. Then she went to the door at the end of the gallery, the door she had not opened. She turned the handle. The garden room was small, a transitional space designed to connect the gallery to the garden beyond, with glass doors on the far wall that would once have opened onto a terrace. The glass doors were dirty, the terrace beyond overgrown, the room itself used for storage pots, garden tools, a bench under a dust sheet, and in the corner, a shape under a dust sheet. The right size. Nora walked toward it slowly. She set her lamp on the floor. She reached out and took the edge of the dust sheet in both hands. She lifted it, pulled it back. The figure was marble, white marble, slightly yellowed with age, but intact, no damage, no cracks, no losses, standing on a small temporary base, not its plinth, not its proper place, but solid and level and secure. Someone had moved it carefully, had placed it here with attention and care, even in the haste of a final winter. She held the lamp up. The figure was a woman, standing, contrapposto, the right hand at her side, completely still. The left hand raised slightly, the palm upward. The posture exactly as it was in the final drawing, the drawing Nora had spent the afternoon studying. Every detail as Thomas Aldrich had resolved it across 12 preparatory studies in the basement of this house in October of 1793. And the face that had been the last thing to be resolved, the most difficult thing to make, the moment of understanding itself, not before and not after, but the instant of it. The face of someone who has just received something they did not know they were waiting for. The left hand open beneath it, the eyes not quite focused on anything present, focused on the thing that has just become clear. Nora stood in the garden room with the lamp and looked at the face. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about what Thomas Aldrich had understood in the making of it, what he had not been able to leave behind, what he had stayed 33 years in the village to be near, what stood between patience and expectation, not arrival, not resolution, not the end of the waiting, the moment of understanding that the waiting itself has been the thing. That patience and expectation together had been producing something all along, not in spite of the absence of what was waited for, but through it. That the space between wanting and receiving is not empty, that it has a shape, that the shape is worth making in marble, that the shape, this face, this open hand, is what it looks like when a person understands that. Nora stood with the lamp for a very long time, the garden room quiet around her, the gallery beyond its door quiet, the house quiet, the Devon night pressing at the dirty glass doors. Then she set the lamp down carefully. She took the dust sheet and folded it neatly and placed it to one side. She looked at the figure one more time, at the face, at the hand. She said quietly, to the figure and to the room and to the 100 years of waiting and to Thomas Aldrich in his village grave with his epitaph about true things, I found it. The garden room did not answer, but the face of the figure in the lamplight had the expression of something that had always known it would be found. That had simply been waiting, with great patience and perfect certainty. She did not move the figure that night. She had considered it, had stood in the garden room after finding it, and thought about going to fetch a trolley from the storage rooms, about moving it back to the gallery, about setting it on its plinth between patience and expectation where it belonged. She had thought about this for several minutes, with the lamp burning low and the Devon night at the glass doors and the figure standing in its corner with its open hand and its particular face. And then she had decided not to. Not because it was too heavy or too late or too dark, because it did not feel right to rush it. Because the figure had been in this corner for 11 years and one more night would not change anything that mattered. Because there was a difference between finding something and restoring it, and she wanted to be in the right frame of mind for the restoration. She wanted to come to it in the morning, in the light, with the full attention it deserved. She covered it again with the folded dust sheet, not fully, just enough to keep the night air off it, a temporary measure, a placeholder. Then she went upstairs and made tea and sat at the kitchen table and wrote in her notebook until midnight. The morning came clear. The first fully clear morning since she had arrived at Ashmore Hall. The October sky washed clean overnight, the Devon light doing something she had not seen it do yet, arriving sharp and direct through the tall south windows of the gallery, casting actual shadows. The long shadows of the sculptures on the pale floor, the shadow of the empty plinth, falling precisely where the shadow of the 18th figure would fall when it stood there again. Nora stood in the gallery doorway and looked at the shadow of the empty plinth for a moment. Then she went to the garden room. She removed the dust sheet entirely this time, folded it, and set it on the bench. She looked at the figure in the morning light, different from the lamplight of the night before, clearer, the details of the marble more visible, the quality of Thomas Aldrich's carving very apparent in the morning light. The surface of the marble worked with extraordinary care, not just in the face and hands, which were the emotional center of the piece, but throughout, the drapery falling with the particular weight of actual cloth, the feet on the base with the particular weight of actual standing, everything committed to, everything made true. She examined it thoroughly before moving it, her professional examination, the kind she would have given any piece before restoration or reinstallation, checking for damage, for cracks in the marble, for losses or repairs, for the condition of the base. The figure was in remarkable condition. 11 years in the garden room had not harmed it significantly. The room had stayed dry, the temperature had been stable. Whoever had placed it there, James Ashmore, in that last November before his death, had chosen the spot well, had placed it facing away from the glass doors, protected from the light, had given it a solid base, had, in his brief, practical way, done what was needed. She wrote her assessment in her notebook. Then she went to find the trolley. Moving the figure took the better part of the morning. Not because it was difficult, she had moved heavier pieces, in more difficult conditions, with less equipment, but because she moved it slowly, because she was not willing to rush any part of this. She padded the trolley with the blankets she found in the storage room. She positioned the figure with great care. She moved it through the garden room door and into the gallery with the deliberateness of someone carrying something that deserved that deliberateness. The gallery received it quietly. That was how it felt, as though the room had been waiting, and the waiting ended not with fanfare, but with the simple, unhurried fact of the figure entering the space it had always been intended for. The other sculptures on their plinths in the clear morning light, the pale floor, the long shadows, the empty plinth between patience and expectation, waiting. She brought the figure to the plinth slowly. She positioned the trolley beside it. She checked the alignment the figure needed to face the south windows to receive the light as Aldrich had intended. She checked the base against the ring in the stone, the circle of slightly darker stone that had recorded the figure's presence for all the years it had stood here. An exact match. Of course. She lifted the figure from the trolley with both hands. It was heavy, real marble always was, and she felt the weight of it in her arms and her shoulders and the full length of her back. She set it on the plinth. She positioned it within the ring. She stepped back. She looked. The figure stood between patience and expectation. The right hand at its side, the left hand raised, palm upward, the face with its particular expression, the moment of understanding, the instant of reception, the face that Thomas Aldrich had spent 12 drawings and 6 weeks in this house arriving at. In the morning light it was extraordinary, not because the light did anything to it that lamplight had not done, but because this was the light it had been designed for, the clear October light through the tall south windows, falling at this angle, at this hour, on this face. Thomas Aldrich had known this light, had stood in this gallery in October of 1793, and had known where the light fell, and at what hour, and at what angle, and had made the face for this specific illumination. The left hand open in the light, the face receiving something. Nora stood in the gallery and looked at the figure for a long time. She worked in the gallery for the rest of the day. The proper work of her commission assessment, documentation, restoration recommendations, moving methodically through the collection in the way she had planned before she had found the empty plinth, before the archive and the letters and the drawings and the garden room, the work she had been sent here to do. She did it well. She was thorough and discreet, as Mr. Castle had required, and she gave each piece the attention it deserved. But every time she moved to a new piece, she was aware of the 18th figure at the end of the room, not distractingly, not in a way that pulled her from her work, simply as a presence. The way a good fire is a presence in a room even when you are not looking at it, the warmth of it, the fact of it. In the late afternoon, when the light had shifted to its amber October angle and the shadows had lengthened across the floor, she stopped working and simply sat. On the floor of the gallery, with her back against the wall, her notebook closed, her pen capped, her work bag beside her, simply sitting, the way you sometimes need to sit when a day has given you a great deal and you need to let it settle. The gallery was very still, the amber light moving slowly across the floor, the sculptures on their plinths, the 18th figure between patience and expectation, the shadows falling in their long afternoon lines. She thought about Richard Ashmore, who had written about his acquisitions like letters to someone and had commissioned a sculpture without specification because he had believed the sculptor would know what was required. Who had died before the sculpture was made? She was fairly certain of this now, from the dates. The commission in 1793 and Richard Ashmore's records ending there. He had not lived to see what Thomas Aldrich made. He had commissioned a thing and not lived to see it. And the dedication on the plinth for R, who understood, had been written by Thomas Aldrich, not by Richard Ashmore. Written for the man who had understood what was needed without being able to say it, who had trusted the sculptor to find it in the stone, who had believed that the nameless thing could be given a shape. Nora sat with this for a long time, the gallery darkening slowly around her as the afternoon light withdrew. She thought about understanding things without being able to say them, about how much of what mattered most was like that, present and real and impossible to articulate, requiring someone with a different kind of knowledge to give it form, a sculptor's knowledge. The knowledge of someone who worked with their hands and with material and with the patience of finding rather than inventing. She thought about Thomas Aldrich staying in the village for 33 years. She thought she understood that too now, not sentimentally, not as the lingering of an old man near something he had made and loved, but practically. The way you stay near a solution to a problem you have spent a long time with, not because the problem needs you anymore, because staying near the solution reminds you that the problem was worth the time it took, that the time was not wasted, that the understanding you arrived at was real. He had made a thing that was true, and he had stayed near it. As a reminder, as a daily proof, she wrote her report that evening, sitting at the desk in the study, with the fire going and the Devon night at the window and the lamp burning warm and the 10 letters on the bedside table upstairs and the gallery below with its 18 figures standing in the dark. The report was thorough. It covered every piece in the collection: condition, provenance, recommendations. It was the report of someone who had looked carefully and recorded honestly and understood what she was looking at. The report that Mr. Castle would take to the trust, and the trust would use to decide what to do with the collection, whether to open the gallery to the public, whether to loan pieces to other institutions, whether to keep everything as it was. She wrote the section on the 18th figure last. She wrote about finding it in the garden room, about the plinth and the dedication and the archive and the letters and the drawings, about Thomas Aldrich and the commission and the 6 weeks in the basement and the unsent letter, about the 33 years in the village, about what the figure was and what it depicted and why it had been made and where it belonged. She wrote carefully, with the same care Thomas Aldrich had used in his letters, plainly and without ornament, because that was the only way she knew to be accurate about difficult things. When she finished, she read it back. She added one line at the end of the section. The figure has been returned to its plinth. It is in good condition. It should remain where it is. She closed the report. She sat for a while at the desk with the fire and the lamp and the Devon night. Then she went down to the gallery one last time. The gallery was completely dark. She did not light the lamps. She stood in the doorway with her own small lamp and let her eyes adjust. The figures emerging slowly from the dark as her eyes found them, the pale marble gathering what little light there was, the bronze giving back nothing, the pale floor and the tall dark windows. She walked the length of the gallery, slowly, lamp in hand, past the figures she had spent 3 days assessing and documenting and understanding, each one in its place, each one its own small act of selection and permanence, someone looking at the world and finding in it something worth making in stone and bronze, something worth keeping. She came to the 18th figure. She stood before it with the lamp. In the lamplight, the face was as it had been the night before, the expression of reception, the open hand, but she saw something in it now that she had not quite seen before, or that she had seen but not understood until she had spent the day with the gallery and the light and the long, slow amber afternoon and her thoughts about Richard Ashmore and Thomas Aldrich and the nature of understanding things that could not be said. The face was not depicting a moment in the past. It was not a figure frozen at the instant of understanding something that had already happened. It was a figure in the continuous present of that moment, always arriving at the understanding, always in the act of receiving, the hand always open, the eyes always at the exact point of clarity, not a record of a thing that had occurred, but the thing itself, made permanent. Thomas Aldrich had made something that was always happening. Something that happened again every time someone stood before it with sufficient attention. Something that required a viewer to complete it the way all true things require the person who sees them. Nora stood before the figure for a long time in the dark gallery, with her lamp, with the October night at the tall windows, with the other figures around her in their patient dark, with the dedication cut into the plinth beneath her feet for R, who understood, and the 10 letters on her bedside table, and the 12 drawings rolled in the basement cabinet, and the small marble tablet in the church at the end of the lane, and the 33 years Thomas Aldrich had spent in the village, and the 11 years the figure had spent under a dust sheet in the garden room. All of it, present in this room, in this figure, in this face and this hand and this moment that was always happening. She lowered her lamp. She turned and walked back down the gallery, through the dark, past the other figures, to the doorway. She paused in the doorway and looked back one last time. The gallery in the dark, the figures barely visible, the 18th at the far end, the marble just catching the last of her lamplight as she stood in the door. The open hand catching the light. She went upstairs. She packed her work bag in the morning. Not because she was leaving, she had another week of work at the hall, perhaps more. The assessment was done, but the documentation was not finished, and there were 2 pieces that required actual restoration work, and she had not yet fully catalogued the drawings from the basement. There was more to do. She would stay and do it. She packed the work bag and unpacked it again, because she had packed it from habit and not from intention. She set it in the corner and left it there. She went downstairs and made her tea and took it to the gallery. The morning light was soft again today. The clear weather had not held. A thin layer of cloud had returned overnight, diffusing the light back to its usual Devon quality. Soft and even and everywhere. No sharp shadows, everything equally visible. She stood before the 18th figure with her tea. The face in the soft morning light, the open hand, the expression that was always arriving. She thought about what she would write to Professor Whitmore, about the collection, about the commission, about what she had found. She would write to him carefully, the way Thomas Aldrich had written his letters plainly and without ornament, because that was the only way to be accurate about difficult things. She would tell him about the empty plinth and the dedication and the archive and the drawings and the garden room. She would tell him what the figure was and what it depicted. She would tell him it was the best thing she had seen in a long time, perhaps the best thing she had seen. She drank her tea in the gallery with the soft Devon light and the 18 figures and the particular quiet of a room that had finally recovered something it had been missing. Not urgently missing it, had managed without, had continued for 11 years without, the other 17 figures standing in their places and the gallery open and complete in all other respects. But missing, nonetheless. The way a room misses something when it has been arranged for 18 and there are only 17. A slight asymmetry, a breath held, a space that knew it was a space. Not anymore. 18 now. The gallery complete. She worked through the week, each day beginning in the gallery with her tea and ending in the study with her report and her notes, the day settling into a rhythm, the kind of rhythm that comes when a place and a person have found their arrangement with each other, the hall quiet around her work. The Devon autumn doing its slow October thing outside the windows, the light changing, the leaves changing, the fields beyond the wall going through their small seasonal adjustments. She ate well, she slept well, she worked well. She visited the church in the village twice more, sat for a while on both occasions before Thomas Aldrich's tablet. He made things that were true. She thought about this each time. about what it meant to spend a life in that pursuit, about the patience it required, about the understanding that some things could not be rushed, and some things could not be said, and some things could only be found by removing what was in the way and trusting what remained. On the last evening, she went to the gallery late. After supper, after her notes, after the fire had burned down and the study was cool and the house had settled into its night sounds, she took her lamp and went to the gallery and walked its length one more time. She had done this every evening. She had not planned to. It had simply become part of the rhythm of the days here, the way the gallery ended each day, the way she needed to see the figures in the lamplight before she slept, not from any obligation or any professional reason, simply because the gallery was worth ending the day in, because it was a room that had been made for looking, and she had been made for looking, and the two things together produced something she had no better word for than right. She came to the 18th figure. She stood before it with the lamp for the last time in this day. She looked at the face, at the hand, at the expression that was always arriving. She thought about Richard Ashmore, who had not lived to see it. She thought about Thomas Aldrich, who had made it and stayed near it for 33 years. She thought about James Ashmore, who had moved it carefully to the garden room in his last November and had not lived to return it in spring. She thought about all the people who had stood before it over the 100 years it had stood in this gallery and had seen in it whatever they needed to see. Whatever true thing felt familiar to them in that particular moment of their lives. She thought about herself, standing here now in the October dark of a Devon house at the end of a week she had not expected and would not forget. She thought, I found it. She thought, and it was worth finding. She lowered her lamp. She walked back down the gallery. At the door, she turned off the wall lamp and let the darkness come back in. Let the figures return to the dark they spent their nights in. Let the gallery be what it was in the night, still and complete and patient. The 18 figures on their plinths, the 18th between patience and expectation, with its open hand and its arriving face, waiting for morning and the light, and whoever would come next to stand before it and find in it what they needed to find. She went upstairs. She got into bed. The Devon night at the window, very still tonight. No wind in the yew tree. The fields invisible in the dark. The village somewhere below with Thomas Aldrich's tablet in the old church and the lane going up to the hall and the hall standing in its grounds in the October dark with its gallery and its 18 figures and its pale stone floor and its tall south windows waiting for morning. She lay in the warm dark and felt the week settling around her. The archive and the letters and the drawings, the basement and the garden room, the figure in the lamplight and in the morning light, and in the amber afternoon light, and in the dark, the open hand, the face, the particular feeling of having done work that mattered. Not the largest work, not the most famous or the most celebrated, simply work that had been required and had been done with the attention it deserved and had resulted in something being returned to where it belonged. A figure on a plinth. A room made complete, 100 years of slightly held breath released. She closed her eyes. Outside, the Devon night was very quiet. The house was very quiet. And below, in the gallery in the dark, 18 figures on their plinths, patient as stone, still as the night, complete. The open hand of the 18th catching no light at all in the darkness, but there, simply there, as it had always intended to be, as Thomas Aldrich had always known it would be, in the end, in the right place, in its own time. Nora slept, deeply, and well, and the gallery held its quiet through the long Devon night, as it always had, as it would